Hello, everybody. It is that time again. Okay. Well, I did check around for more news this morning, but not much has been going on so far. More talk about the two different Martian missions going on from robots, and one specifically talking about how the Indian one is so much cheaper and why it was, since their entire Mars attempt was $100 million, which is a ton of money as far as I'm concerned, but compared to most such projects, it was about 1/9 of the cost. So, way cheaper. Of course, there's a lot of reasons for that, and the article that I saw goes into those details, but I don't really feel like ranting about those. I am going to talk about Arcade again, though, because at least one thing has improved in recent days, which is that the queue times have gone down, though the means employed to get them down are somewhat questionable. They have, as of the other day, put in a 5-minute AFK timer, and if you're away from keyboard for more than 5 minutes, you just get disconnected. Gods have disconnected you, is what you will see. Which makes it hard to do things like go to the bathroom, which I find incredibly funny. They swear they're going to make them not quite the 45 minutes they started at, but more than 5. But who knows when they will. Personally, I am rather annoyed by the fact that they love to take the servers down at what for me is 11 a.m. every day for maintenance. At least every day I'm able to play, it seems to go down right then for maintenance. I know they're a Pacific Coast company, and therefore most of the players are too, because in every game I've ever been in, the West Coast players outnumber the East Coast players, and I don't really understand why, but it has always been that way. It's very hard. In fact, in some games, we had specifically East Coast guilds because too many people wanted to do stuff at like midnight my time. I don't know about you, but I don't really want to have to be doing something that takes hours at midnight when I have work the next day, so that I have to wake up as early as 6 a.m. I was good about it the other day, but last night again, because I didn't have to go into work super early, I ended up staying up until 1:30 in the morning, which is craziness. It really is. And I shouldn't do it. I really shouldn't, but that's when the biggest mass of players are on by far. So I get suckered into staying because I want to actually experience some of the in-game content in the game. really hard for me to like organize anyone in the morning, even though there's usually maybe a dozen people on. Too many people of very different levels, and they don't all want to do anything that I might be up for. Even with an alt that I haven't really played, it's just hard to be at the level that is useful for that sort of stuff. Though it has been more fun, in some times at least. Other times it's just frustrating because so many of the players are dicks. They really are. Complete assholes. They don't at all care about anyone else in the game except for themselves. Which shouldn't really surprise me when there are videos on the forums that teach you how to lure in gullible victims that need to transport their trade goods across the ocean and dump them over the side, taking their cargoes for yourself. Because, that's a thing. And they say, oh, well, I want to be a pirate, but no, they don't really want to be a pirate. They have no intention of being a pirate. They just want to do what is the dickiest thing possible. And I think some of that is because they get screwed over all day in real life, and so they decide that in games they want to get their comeuppance and do that same sort of thing to somebody else because they can. Games prove to me that formation of society is a complex and very difficult thing when there's no underlying level to deal with. Because the ones willing to do the most awful things to other people are the ones that, in the end, get to do what they want. Which is very much true in real life in a lot of cases. And the one that feels that the best way to get ahead is to sabotage their rival or business competitor is the easy example of that. And all too often, it works. We don't manage to seem to selectively breed out the traits that cause this to be the way things work, and it kind of annoys me. But you see it in game because it's a thing. Everyone seems to want to just screw over everyone else, and it's annoying to me. And I ranted about that before. I'm sure some of you that watched the earlier one remember that. But I just can't help talking about it because as much as I like the guild that I play with, without being in a large group, there's just no way of fighting off anyone else in the game. The whole game is set up so that classes balance out and things that I don't have control over, like the latency of my connection to the servers, which goes up and down all over the place. In fact, if you remember from when I last talked about latency, ping is the way you usually test latency. I can ping their servers, and my ping will go to be anything from 50 milliseconds to 150 milliseconds. And if the other guy's connection is stable and mine is not, I'm the usual one that loses. It's not as much of an issue in group PvP because you have more options, but there's so little group PvP that tends to happen. last night actually was one of the few times that I've been involved in some larger scale group PvP. And I didn't do so bad. That's sort of the thing that my character is built for. And outside of that, they're not that great. In fact, if you would have saw me last night, I got killed a few times. I might have killed a couple of people. Mostly, I just rained down arrows on a particular patch of ground where a bunch of people were and watched as they all lowered their health because I was hitting them with arrows. So if you didn't get it from what I just said, I actually play an archer character. And I usually always do. I have in almost every, like, fantasy-oriented game that I've ever played. Even though it wasn't a good class, in Lineage 2 I played a archer. Most people went assassin because the close-in blade work was lots more effective usually. It was hard to keep someone at the right range to use archery without getting hit back. The same is true pretty much here. I find it hard as a player with a very variable ping to fight against other people one-on-one. It's kind of annoying that way, but people can do it. I've seen some people that are amazing at managing to keep someone at just the right range, but I never seem to be able to do that. Maybe it's just because I don't devote enough hours of my day to such things, and other people do. Or maybe it's just because I'm getting older, but I don't find it as easy to do that sort of thing as I used to. I'd rather be more involved in coming up with crazy builds that I like to play, not just for PvP. But I have to have my archer first. My second character, my alt, as they tend to call it, is the one that I play around with, but I haven't done much of that. Because there's an almost never-ending accumulation of gear and other things that you need once you hit the level cap, and I hit the level cap the other day, so now I start to grind for gear. I have what is generally called questing gear, and questing gear is not terribly good in PvP. Wow, who would have thought that? Seeing as how I said that I tend to die pretty easily. And if you're not a gamer, this next part will probably not make any sense to you whatsoever. But if you are a gamer, this might actually make sense. There are different methods to... how do I want to put this? Disable an enemy player. You can basically daze them, which keeps them from using any skills for a little bit, and they can't move. And it's kind of short. It only lasts like maybe 2 seconds. This is one of the chief skills I have access to. And if I have placed another skill before that one onto my opponent, rather than just dazing them, I actually knock them to the ground, and because they have to then get back up, that's a little bit more effective. It takes about 3 to 3.5 seconds, so you can get in almost twice as many hits that way. Obviously, that skill that I needed before that is not always up, so that's kind of difficult to do, at least in a group setting. But then the other ways to deal with people are putting them to sleep, which if you hit them, the sleep goes away. So that's not super effective unless you're prepared for that. Oh, and they're pinning lines. Yay! I already see the lines, so I'm not really sure what they're painting, but whatever. In fact, it actually looks like they were getting rid of the original dotted line that they had on the road. Anyways, so yeah, you have sleep, you have the stun. Most stuns are at the end of a charge, so you'll like leap to the enemy when you do a stun. In fact, I can't think of any that aren't a charge. So that's the way it usually works in this game. There's also lots of what they call snares, which just keep you from moving, but you can still fire and do other stuff. I have a snare, but it's not super effective, and I tend to forget to use it when it's actually useful. And in fact, in PvP, it doesn't even really last very long at all. And on mobs, it's hit or miss. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's really fun to have an enemy that visibly on your screen appears snared, but they chase you down and smack you around. Lovely. I kind of wish they'd fix that, so that the visual sign, at least, that you had succeeded wasn't basically just composed entirely of fail, because it doesn't actually tell you if you succeeded or not. And I would love to pass this big truck, because it's going to go up this hill stupidly slow. You haven't been moving fast anyways. But unless the guy in front of me does, I can't really go around him. We're not even doing 30 miles an hour, in case you're curious. So I'm wasting a lot more gas going up this hill than I'd really like. But, yeah. Back to the game. You have some snares. I, in fact, had the option to get another snare, but this one is weird. It boxes you in with your enemy, which, as someone who fights at a distance, I in no way want to take ability that locks someone in with me so that we can't leave. You know, doing the whole one man enters, two men enter, one man leaves. See, I'll even get my quote wrong. But, yeah, doing that is pretty wonky for someone who needs to hit people at a distance. Up close, my abilities do less damage. So, that's a thing. There's lots of things. There really are. And I think that goes over most of the types of CC that there is in the game. There's another move that bubbles you up and you, like, flail around in the air for long lengths of time. But, if you take enough damage, you fall back down, so it's not super effective if they want to keep hitting you. really good, though, if they want to charge up an ability. So you toss someone up in the air, you charge up your ability you want to use, and then you smack them with it when they can't go anywhere. It only affects one person, though, so in a group it's not such a huge deal. But, yeah. Anyway, so what I was going to say is that my character in particular is very, very easy to take out if you have stuns. If you can stun me, it's easily the easiest way to take care of me. If you snare me even, I at least am far less mobile because I can't really go anywhere. I can still shoot you, though, which I can't if I'm stunned. And I just tend to get pretty darn annoyed with the ones that stun me. And they have some way longer stuns than I do. My stun, like I said, can't even last more than 2 seconds. Some stuns from other classes can easily last 10 seconds or more, and that it's just crazy. I don't understand how exactly they do that one, but I'm sure someone might tell me. Even for all that I don't necessarily like some of the aspects of PvP, I do like the massive scale PvP, which is I keep starting to say, and then I get sidetracked. But, like last night, I felt that I was actually being helpful. And here's the crazy thing about last night. There's times of war where you actually get points for killing other players. But this one group of about 6 enemy players came into an area that is used to farm up materials for late game weapon stuff. Not the really late game, but the early late game, as crazy as that sounds. So it affects people that just, like me, recently leveled up. And they decide to come through and just start slaying anyone in a group smaller than theirs. And, you know, I can understand that. But they kept doing it over and over and over again. And the conflict just kept building. And eventually the other people on my faction started going, oh, we might want to kill these people. And we got this big group together and we hunted them down and took care of them. And then more red people show up. This is the game colors the enemy red. Not for what they look like, but for their names. To tell you who is an enemy faction player and not your faction's player. But yeah. It had easily more than 40 players on each side going at it back and forth. We kept pushing them, and enough people would break off because they'd die during the conflict that they'd regroup and we'd back off. And then they'd push us, and we'd basically fall back and regroup. And it was probably the most fun PvP I've had so far in the game. Which sounds crazy because it's not even wartime. In fact, in wartime, you won't find that many people, like, available. There will not be 40 players on both sides. No one, other than myself, at least, seems to want to actually play on relatively even terms. They want a clear, decided advantage. In fact, they find it no fun unless they have a clear, decided advantage over the other players. And that's not why I play a game. all fine with not being the best ever at PvP. But I like some strategy in there. Not just ganking, because that's the term for it, when one side basically is at a complete disadvantage and there's no real fight involved. And this has been such a slow drive that I'm almost late for my class. And I left early, which makes no sense. But I've pretty much ranted enough about Arcade. I do still want to try to do some streaming. I'm not sure how well that's going to work. I don't think I have enough upload bandwidth to make it effective. In fact, I'm almost positive I don't have enough upload bandwidth to make that effective. But I would like to do that. In fact, for you guys, I actually went and I looked to see if it's even possible for me to buy a connection in my area with more upload speed, and it is not. It is not a thing. I can get a little bit more down, but I can't get any more up at all. As important as that is these days, it is a pain in my ass. I can always use more down, but I need more up, and it is just not happening. I ranted about internet service providers yesterday for the entire second half of the show. So, I won't go into that again. And about how it's not in their best interest to do anything that I actually want. But, I would love to do so much more than I am currently able to. I mean, I'd love it not to take 3 hours to upload a video. In fact, it's now up to 6, or almost 6. Since I combined 2 into a single unit. And I almost went past a spot, because I couldn't see it past that big truck that I will be parking next to. A lifted Silverado, because obviously you need to lift your car even higher. And make it even harder to see around. But have fun, take care, and I will be back in a few hours. Hello again, everybody. Back from class, and it is time to leave. Well, the spot's not so great at actually managing to see in that direction. And by that direction, I mean that big truck that I'm parked next to. And I thought I had managed to get the temperature down in the car, but it doesn't seem so. We'll see how this goes. Open the moonroof. One nice thing about my car is that it may be old, but it has some nice features. I bought it when it was old though, so I didn't pay nearly what I would for those features if it were new. Okay, I've decided that I want to talk about space a little bit more. So I talked somewhat about distances earlier, and about the time between different distances. And the reason you talk about time a lot when you're talking about distance and space is because, for all practical purposes, we have some pretty hard limits on our ability to gather information around us. 1 light second, which is basically the distance between the Earth and the Moon, is about the limit of real-time information for us, and actually half a light second is actually more appropriate for basically real-time. That already means that there's a second between when something happens and when you see it. And our reactions are usually in the range of a third to a half of a second. So, like, if you wanted to dodge out of the way of being shot at, you would have basically that much time to even start to move, which is why you really can't dodge fire from like a gun. Your only option is to not be where the bullet is going before it's fired. That's a lot different though in space. Because of the ranges involved, it takes a long time to get anywhere. Here, some of the fastest weapon systems we have now are railguns that they've been testing for the Navy. They hit something like Mach 8, if I recall, which is well faster than any manned aircraft that we've ever produced, or at least anything that we've produced that anyone is willing to talk about. Not to go into conspiracy theory territory, but just to be on the safe side, I'll put that little catch-it on it. There's always the possibility that someone has tested something that is manned and faster. They've done some unmanned tests of craft that use what are called scramjets. They were hypersonic flight tests that were done by NASA and the U.S. Air Force. And those got up to about the same sort of velocities that we're looking at for a modern military railgun. And while railguns for us are relatively new as a weapon system, and they've only been used in testing so far, Mach 8, when you place it out in space, isn't really that fast, and you can't even call it Mach 8 anymore. You would have to actually say how many feet or meters per second it's traveling at. Because those are the things that you actually use to gauge the time it takes for something to hit something else in space. And unlike on Earth, there are a lot more variables for making your long shot with a railgun. But the biggest of those is going to be speed. We have a reasonable chance to hit the moon pretty easily with a railgun, but for a railgun to actually have its projectile be fired from, say, near or low Earth orbit and hit the moon would take, and I'm doing the quick math off the top of my head, more than a few hours. In fact, I think it would take the better part of a day, if not an entire day. And I don't think that's actually even true. Again, I'm doing the calculations off the back of my head. But what I come up with is a weapon that, when fired, accelerated really quickly for the first few fractions of a second until it gets to space, and then it's basically accelerated all it's going to accelerate. And that's it. It's at whatever speed it left at, and it will take a very long time to get there. Now, a missile would get there faster, and it would depend on how fast the missile is. But that's only because it would have a longer time to accelerate, and acceleration is the key to moving around really in space. Now, there's a practical limit to the speed any object can travel, which is the speed of light. And you get time dilation that happens when you get at high fractions of the speed of light, to where time for that object that's moving very fast is different than it is for us who are not moving that fast. Though that fast is a very relative thing. And the whole solar system moves, and the whole galaxy, for that matter, moves. So, relatively, we're always moving somewhere, and at pretty high velocities from the guesses that we think. It's really hard for us to measure those because our scale is just so small that it's hard to get a grasp of how fast we're actually moving. Not usually a big deal, because for us, we haven't even gone into our solar system very far. I mean, we have some very simplistic unmanned probes that have gone out past what could be considered the edge of our local solar system just recently, in fact within the last year, I think. But there's arguments on exactly when you reach the edge of the solar system, which if you're into that sort of thing, kind of makes it interesting, but to me, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. Okay. Now that I've got the yawn out of the way, needed more sleep. I must remember to go to sleep earlier. But, yeah, since it would take the better part of a day for a railgun round to get from near Earth orbit to the moon, and that's what we call a short distance in space, it's not really practical in any modern sense of the term. To really have any sort of combat in space, at least at any sort of range. I mean, that's one of the things you look at in like Star Wars. They all get right up close next to each other, but how hard it is to even get that close to each other in space is just absolutely mind-boggling. Also, finding something the size of, say, a spacecraft, and even a space just within, say, the orbit of the moon, is really hard. That's why we have so many small meteorites and things that we just don't even ever notice. We have trouble finding and spotting them because of how small and how basically normal they are, for lack of a better term. They blend in with space. Because it's hard for us to focus on small objects at what we consider to be relatively long ranges. Ironically, we're able to do fairly good at detecting objects that are incredibly far away, like other solar systems. But even then, it's mostly finding a star, which is a huge ball of light as far as we're concerned from this distance. So, they try to make themselves detected by their normal operations. Well, there's no consciousness involved, but they're lit up. So, they're actually giving off something. A rock in space doesn't really give off much anything. Depending on its characteristics, it will reflect light at a certain frequency, and it'll bounce back certain types of radiation, like radar. But for all that, it's really hard to find them, especially if they're moving quickly. Some things are easier to detect because of how fast they're moving, but there's a threshold for that, and the threshold is fairly high. An object has to be going at a pretty enormous speed to actually be easy for us to detect currently. This is why a lot of more hard science fiction, like what I write, it's really hard to find enemy ships in space, even when they're sometimes more massive than like an aircraft carrier. On a world like ours, an aircraft carrier is relatively easy to spot from a distance. But that's because there are lots of assumptions that we can make, and the way we're going to really find it is most likely with visual observation. Usually through some sort of optical system is how you detect such a thing. Because we don't have any flying aircraft carriers, at least when I'm saying this, unlike, say, the Avengers movie with their flying aircraft carriers, since we don't have those, you're not really going to pick them up too much on radar. Radar doesn't work terribly well under a certain height from the surface of the planet. And that's going to vary a little bit depending on what sort of radar gear you have. But one of the reasons helicopters can be considered fairly stealthy is that they actually can fly easily under the height of most radar systems. So radar's out of the question for detecting something on the planet's surface for the most part. I wouldn't rule it out that there is orbital radar systems. I'm positive someone's got more than a few, but they wouldn't be much use looking down on a planet, except as like a weather identifier, because basically clouds even are going to have some sort of feedback that is going to cause a disruption in the radar. My brain doesn't want to work. It really doesn't right now. But in the radar bounce back, what actually gives us a radar image, it would be distorted by the things that make up clouds. Could have turned a little bit better there. But yeah, that makes it hard to find things that way in space. You can use radar, but radar, depending on who you believe, and I've had a professor tell me that radar technically doesn't quite move as fast as light, though I I've had other people tell me that because it's all basically electromagnetic radiation, that, and I do mean that light is electromagnetic radiation when I say that, and so are radio waves, that they should be moving at the same speed. And I think the speed is fairly close, but I think for some reason, technically, radar is not quite as fast as like a LiDAR system. LiDAR being laser imaging detection and ranging, I believe is what it is. I swear, my brain does not want to work right now. But yeah, so it's hard to see an object in space. The easiest way to find an object in space where you don't expect to find one is if it's giving off some other form of energy, like heat, for instance, which is a way to find spacecraft, but spacecraft only need, well, here's the thing. Space is sort of considered cold, but it's hard to bleed off heat in space, at least, you know, within our solar system. Which makes that a kind of a weird thing. But basic heat level for, say, us to live in is significant. But it's not the same as, like, the heat coming off of, say, a rocket motor. They're on a completely different scale. The heat that we would give off just by keeping some people alive in space is probably enough to keep a pretty good look at an object in space if it were close enough and we knew generally where to look in the first place. On the other hand, the heat of, say, a rocket motor that is in space, and even if we're not specifically looking for it, that would probably be pretty darn easy to spot still. However, there's a big difference between the two, which is that the heat from a rocket engine is directional. It basically flares out behind the vehicle. The heat radiated off of spacecraft from the required activities to keep people alive and to provide us an atmosphere we can actually live in is omnidirectional for the most part. There's been a lot of talk about using systems to route the heat so that it is all exhausted in one direction. If any ship were ever to do that, it would be really hard to see when it was coming at you. However, when you're behind it or in front of it, if it's trying to slow down as it gets closer to you, it's going to be pretty easy to see because that's where you're going to get all the heat exhaust. And that's the thing that a lot of people don't really understand about space travel. Unlike going on the ground, it's not all just accelerates, hold a specific speed, and then use some sort of braking to slow down. The only braking in a spacecraft, because there's nothing else to use as a braking system, are either planets, which have issues if you're not aiming for a planet, and it has to be a planet that has an atmosphere because they can use what's called aereo braking. You don't want to use a planet to try to slow you down that is a solid mass because you'd ram right into it and it would be like firing a missile into the ground, for lack of any real difference between the two. So yeah, you can't use a solid object for obvious reasons because you'd smash your ship into little pieces. So you need an atmosphere that's not so thick that it, crushes your vehicle like a tin can it is. That said, that's not usually very effective if you aren't actually going to be going to such a planet. Even Mars would be difficult for us to use aerial braking on. The atmosphere of Mars is just really damn thin. And the thin atmosphere, while great as far as not crushing our ship like a tin can it is, isn't really going to slow us down very much either. Makes Mars really great if you want to use it as what they call a slingshot maneuver. Not trying to slow down, but to speed up, or at least radically change course. But the other option you have is to do what they call flipping the ship, which means pointing the engines in the opposite direction and accelerating backwards so you slow down. Think of this if it were a car that you have to drive forward until you're roughly halfway there, depending on what the acceleration you want is, and then you turn around and you drive in reverse. Now, in a spaceship, which direction is forward and backward is really not applicable. There's no forward and backward except based on where your engine is pointed. And if you have an engine on the front and an engine on the back, you don't even have any real concept of front and back. We don't tend to make ships, though, that have an engine on the front and the back, because that would let us do some really crazy things, which would quite potentially just squish the ship into little bits, which could be entertaining on some level, but you certainly wouldn't want people inside when you did that. And there is a police car, one of the rare police cars, because there's only one that actually operates out of town. And I should probably talk about gravity and how that is used as a measure of our ability to withstand acceleration at this point. While I was talking about railguns and scramjets being able to get up to Mach 8, they have really high gravities of acceleration for the most part. And this is a problem for humans because we can't really take much in the way of gravity. I mean, we're used to a single gravity because that is the normal for Earth and that's what we developed in. But the same is not due to gravity by acceleration. I will talk more about that later because we have arrived. So, look forward to a part 3 of my discussion on space at some point here. Alright, take care and have a good